Are you satisfied with your understanding of sustainability? If you are not, imagine a journey together, a pluralistic one, with academia, innovators, startups, NGOs, all looking for solutions to the greatest challenge of our time. My name is Samuele Tini, and this is the Sustainability Journey. Welcome to another episode. So today we are going to discuss an important path. McKinsey, the UN and others, they say that philanthropy has an important role. One of the articles I have read is like, from McKinsey in 2021 said, it is time for philanthropy to step up the fight against climate change. So I started researching and say, how philanthropy is related with sustainability and our change. And I found a change maker, somebody that has a community of over 200 philanthropic institutions working to deliver change and work for impact in our planet. So I want to welcome here today the Executive Director of Wings, Benjamin Bellegy. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Samuel. I'm glad to be with you today.
Benjamin, we know philanthropy has an important role, and philanthropic capital can be a very powerful ally in solving our current crisis. But our usual question is, who is Benjamin? How you have become a change maker in the field of sustainability?
So I'm originally from France, but since our organization Wings is headquartered in Brazil, I live now in São Paulo, Brazil since 2016. But I've lived in different parts of the world. I spent a year in Ethiopia, so not far from where you're based, Samuele. I spent 3 years in Tunisia. I spent a year in Canada. And I worked in different types of organizations, but mostly around sustainable development issues, international cooperation, civil society strengthening. And what brought me to this space, and then ultimately to philanthropy and philanthropic networks, is really a willingness to rethink the societal models, the economic models, and simply trying to find healthier ways for our societies to live and to live in more harmony with each other, more harmony with nature. And for a long time, I didn't have like any sort of too narrow or too specific perspective on what exactly I wanted to do, because of course that's so broad and it sort of touches on almost anything you can think of in society. And so I started the journey quite organically. And after my studies, I studied political sciences, I studied communications. And after that, I was just really attracted by that place called Ethiopia and very fascinated by its history and culture. And so I just decided to go there and sort of learn. That was really the idea. So I didn't go there with a sort of a savior mindset. It was really like, let's go learn, and with lots of humility. And while I was there, I just started doing some volunteering with NGOs, just sort of to be active, to be part of society, to be sort of doing something. And that's how it all started. And then little by little, I continued in this space of international cooperation, sustainable development. I worked with the International Cooperation of Monaco in Tunisia, and then I worked around a lot of sustainable development projects, nature conservation, carbon credit projects, and a number of other kinds of projects. Then I went to Fondation France, based in Paris, and I was in charge of all their international programs, including post-emergency, including civil society strengthening, family farming, especially in Africa. And then I joined Wings, and that was a little bit different when I joined Wings, because Wings is not itself a grant maker or an NGO doing work on the ground. We're really more on the behind the curtains, behind the scenes, to enable the sector, to enable the field. And so here I am now with Wings since 2016 now.
Wow. And I mean, I'm glad we can have a connection. So we are connecting two sides of the global south, so-called global south today. And really, you can see that the fast spark was here in East Africa, in Ethiopia, so of your journey. And for sure, I want now, you have a bit preempted, and I want to go a bit deeper in that. Like for the people that are not familiar, I would like to ask, what is Wings? And you have mentioned you are a network of philanthropy. So can you share a bit more about your model and how you work?
Well, Wings is really quite unique as an organization because these 200 plus members we're talking about are themselves for many networks. A lot of them are philanthropic networks themselves. So we have this sort of network of networks position and building bridges between different organizations that are helping to strengthen the philanthropic sector around the world. But our constituency is not only made of networks, it also includes some foundations and some actual funders that care about the collective impact of philanthropy, that are thoughtful about the need to invest in this, what we call this infrastructure or the support system for philanthropy and giving. And so that's a community of change makers and catalysts that are here to help grow philanthropy so that there are more resources, private resources for the common good, private resources for development, and that also these resources are more impactful, more effective, and more transformative. And so that means our members, as I said, philanthropic networks, philanthropy intermediaries that help to channel the resources, the financial resources to the right actors on the ground. That includes organizations promoting cultures of giving, campaigning to grow giving in certain countries and regions. That includes organizations that advocate for better laws, better incentives, better regulations for philanthropy to grow and to thrive. It includes collaborative bodies, coordination mechanisms, data, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very diverse constituency. But what is really powerful and interesting about that community is that all these networks and support organizations, they serve, they reach, they sometimes represent over 100,000 foundations and funders around the world. So although these 100,000 funders are not directly members of Wings, that's simply the indirect reach. But we just felt, and I felt when I joined this organization, that there was such an incredible potential to harness that community to bring about change, because we need the philanthropic sector to change. I think philanthropy has indeed an incredible potential, although it's very small in terms of volumes if you compare it to markets, if you compare it to government resources. But these resources are independent, they're flexible, they're free in a way. So that gives us a capacity to innovate, to do what others can, to take risks. And so we can have really an incredible catalytic effect if these resources are well used. So the idea now is really working with these Wings members to bring about change in the way philanthropy is being done, is being practiced, but also being stronger collectively to advocate for better policies, better environment, so that there is more philanthropy that can grow, especially in a context where a lot of governments around the world are closing the space, both for NGOs and civil society, but also for donors and for foundations and for philanthropy in general. So we need that collective voice. We need that articulation that connects local work, national work, and global work. So that's what here, that's what Wings is here for, trying to both improve ourselves as a field and also improve our environment.
And it's really an important part that you do. And you rightly says the space for civil society engagement and work, and also the funding has been reducing rather than improving in the latest year. And I want to ask now, really a bit deeper in the role of philanthropy, especially as an organization that advocates for change and work. So we have read, and I've mentioned before, that philanthropy can have an enabling role in responding to our crisis, can be, as you mentioned, there are flexible funds, they can respond rather at the grassroots, in going deep down and work in transforming communities. So, but which are the challenges and opportunities, especially also from your point of view, at this intersection, philanthropy, sustainability, civil society, how we can freely foster a social change? And subsequently, how Wings is trying to change it, the narrative, and advocate for a better philanthropy.
Yes, so I think that if you take our strategic plan, or if you take the philanthropist transformation initiative we launched last year, which is really the framework we're using in terms of how we want to influence philanthropic actors, what kind of practices and principles we think the field should follow to really have a greater impact. The starting point of both is the acknowledgement of what we now call the global polycrisis, which is the idea that we're not facing sort of independent issues that need to be fixed. We're actually facing an interconnected set of very deep structural issues, which represent actually an existential threat for humanity as a whole. And that is really sort of a wake-up call to all philanthropic actors that they cannot continue to do business as usual, even with trying to sort of incrementally improve our effectiveness, being a bit more strategic, etc. This is not fit for purpose in front of a global polycrisis that is coming fast, and we see the crisis multiplying and accelerating, and etc. etc. So that the starting point for us is we need to really rethink profoundly. And a lot of great practices, of course, are already out there in the philanthropic sector that can be harnessed and need to be scaled up and need to be replicated around the world. So um, we basically say three things around this transformation. What needs to change in philanthropy to really become an actor of transformation that can help tackle these multiple and deep crises, both locally, globally. One is to see ourselves not as achievers of change, those who are actually sort of having that direct impact we're so obsessed with, and that we are, so amazing and we've managed to do this or to do that or to no. We need to think about ourselves as enablers, and that means also losing control over exactly what is the direct impact we have, but being a contributor, an enabler to both communities, networks, and other actors, and through partnerships and through collaboration that can really bring that systemic change. And that systemic change, I think you can't control it in the same way as an engineer, thinks about the outcomes of, an infrastructure project. I think it's a very different dynamic. It's collective, it's distributed, and it's very much about the values that drive action, the broad vision of society we're trying to achieve, and then trusting partners, trusting communities, and going with the flow, I would say. So there's this idea of shifting from achiever to enabler. That's one. The second one is what we call walk the talk. And what's interesting with philanthropy is that we keep thinking about philanthropy as grant making. Well, first, grant making is not the main operating modus for most foundations outside the West, outside Europe, and especially outside North America. But beyond that, we also need to think about philanthropy as a whole. If you take a foundation have their grants, of course, for those who are grant makers, or their operations for those who operate programs. But then they also have assets. They have a lot of financial resources, endowments that they might be sitting on, or they simply have that very close connection to very wealthy families or corporations that have, huge power in their hands. And foundations may have a lot of influence and social capital. And so there are all these aspects. And for us, the second big bucket for change is really walking the talk and being consistent across all the dimensions of a foundation. So concretely, that means that for a foundation that has, an endowment, to not only focus on how they're going to spend, their 5% or 10% of return every year with projects, but what do they do with the whole capital and the whole assets they have? Are they sure this is not affecting and hurting? Are they maybe leveraging to have a good, like, positive impact through impact investment, for example? And so that's an example of how we think philanthropy needs to become much more consistent across all its dimensions, and also leverage everything, all the assets that we have. Given the urgency, we cannot stay, doing good with one hand and then potentially harming with the other hand. So that's the second big change we see. And that's very connected, of course, to climate, because again, giving you numbers, philanthropy, like foundations of philanthropy is much bigger and broader than just foundations. But let's just take foundations with the data we have, which also is not complete, but we have identified that foundations represent $1.5 trillion in assets. And so if you start really moving the needle on how these assets are being invested and managed, I mean, the impact is just like even not comparable with the impact you can have with grants. So that's the second one. And the third one is really that in a world that is facing such massive existential threats, we need to think about the long-term future of humanity. Whatever is our focus, we may be a foundation or a donor focused on culture or education, or we need to remember that we have climate change in front of us, plus a number of other potentially uh, uh, very, very impactful and terrible crises, and that we cannot sort of ignore them and think like, okay, no, I'm not a climate funder, or I'm not a this or that funder. We need to change that mindset and remember we're all on the same boat on planet Earth. We're all going through these turbulences. And if you do education, if you do culture, if you do health or something else, you need to remember you're in this context. And that means, for example, integrating a climate lens transversely into the work that we do. And that's the whole message of the Philanthropy for Climate movement that was started by our members in Europe, and that then we took globally, which is really encouraging funders and donors to whatever is their focus, their size, their nature, etc., to really integrate climate into their work if they want to be able to continue to work tomorrow.
And it's really an important step because you said it rightly. There is no a planet B. We are told. So we really all work. We need to work together. So you need to work, and I really like the second point, walk the talk. So don't put philanthropy or because we know foundation controls sometimes big companies, not at the sides, as you said, the 5-10%, but really at the core of what you're doing. And you can really transform even the system. And talking about transformation, I want to now ask you from your, and we know you had just your global gathering recently down here next to us in Nairobi. So I want to ask, can you share some impact stories and can you share some impact stories and work on coming out from that forum and your initiative that really have touched you and that you are really proud of?
We are starting actually to gather such stories of impact from across the globe. And the Philanthropy's Transformation Initiative report itself illustrates the 10 principles for change. We have 10. Each one of them has a case study that really shows the transformation journey also that foundations go through to be more, to trust more their partners, to be more collaborative, to integrate climate and so on and so forth. So I invite everyone listening to us, and of course you, Samuele, to go to the Philanthropy's Transformation Initiative website and check these stories because they are really interesting. There are so many, and we need to gather more and more. So we're actually in this process. Every month, every year, we're going to publish more of these cases and stories because we need to create that emulation. And I can just maybe mention one because I think it's interesting. As I know you have this sustainability focus, and we're talking about climate. There's a community foundation in Australia called the Lord Myers Charitable Community Foundation. And they were working more around like housing issues in um, underprivileged neighborhoods of Melbourne, and they were really looking at the different issues people were facing, and slowly they started shifting from again that sort of narrow vision about we are a foundation doing housing, so we need to do houses for people, and we need to count how many houses we did for how many people. And they started looking at the intersections with like health and how housing relates to health. And then by looking at that, they just started seeing an important connection to climate change and heat waves and other and fires, and they started understanding that they had to think about this climate question as part of their housing programs, and so they started really integrating the two ideas, and they with sustainable habitat and resilient habitat for people to be able to also survive the heat waves in Australia that are becoming stronger and stronger, and each time more often, by more resilient housing, and that really showed to have an incredible effect on the health of the people, the communities they were helping, but also with some positive effects around economic empowerment and revenue and income generation by training these same communities to build such houses and work around sustainable energy and integrate renewable energy into these houses. So I just felt like that was an interesting example of a journey from, again, a narrower perspective on one issue to bringing the different aspects in and having a more holistic and more transformative approach to work.
Fantastic, Benjamin. And for sure, we will put in the description all the links. So everybody, if wants to read the report and go deeper in the cases, in the 10 points, of course, can go and discuss and see. And I want to now ask you a question about the future. So we are, as you said, we are in the era of the polycrisis, and philanthropy can be a very powerful enabler. However, still, I mean, with less resources, as you say, than others, so the government, donors, and others. So I want to ask how philanthropy can become more effective to address these needs that we really need to solve. Without without that, we will lose our planet.
Yeah, I mean, there is a great diversity of philanthropic players, and I think there's a role for everyone. It might not be the same for everyone. If you're a small funder working very locally, then I think it's going to be a lot about, well, thinking holistically about your work. Again, resonating with the example I just gave, it will mean really working through trust with communities and trying to build from the ground up, and not build actually, but recognize the agency of these communities and sort of support that, and take it as the foundation for any kind of work to be done. And then also working through partnerships, because that partnership and collaboration mindset can apply to any scale. So even very locally, there are always bridges to be built with local enterprises or local government or other actors, and trying to be that enabler and that bridge builder. So that's it. And then you might be a bigger foundation that is thinking in terms of really systemic change at the systems level, and I think that this is critical, that foundations start playing more of a policy influence role with accountability, of course, because there are also, it can be an issue if philanthropic actors, just because they have wealth and private money, can influence the democratic process in a way. So it requires scrutiny, of course, but I see it as a very positive thing that foundations start thinking about how they can influence positively policy making, because that's what can really have the probably the biggest multiplier effect, the greater, at the greater scale. And so it's encouraging to see more foundations, including on issues around climate, to leverage their influence, their connections, and their sort of 360 broad view to help influence political processes and fund networks and fund ecosystems and fund those who can also nurture that kind of systemic change. That's another piece that I think really needs to change, is that historically funders have not really funded strategically this whole ecosystem of support for their own sector. it's been more like a transactional thing. So, you're a foundation and you need that kind of service or that kind of data or that kind of connection with other donors, then, you might give grants or help create a new network or a new infrastructure organization. But then the field kind of became messy and duplicative and competitive and also with lots of gaps. So I think what needs to change is for our sector to really think about this ecosystem as the key element for systemic change and for unlocking collective impact, not as a service provider only. And so we need strategic investments. We need to create more synergies, and we need to help these networks play their leadership role. I think networks have a great leadership potential, and the best example I can think of is the Philanthropy for Climate movement. It comes from it's been really facilitated and accelerated by a number of association of foundations in different countries, starting in the UK, in Europe, and now we launched it. It was launched in Brazil. It's going to be launched in the Arab region. Was launched in Canada. So it became like really that big global movement that is all interconnected. So there's a common goal to embrace climate in philanthropy. And all these networks, they work with their constituencies, but they connect the dots through wings, and they build that global collective movement. And they play a leadership role. They push the sector, they challenge the sector. And I think that's a great example of how networks are instrumental to unlocking the sort of transformative power of philanthropy, but that really requires more support and more thoughtful investments from funders into this ecosystem.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's really an interesting part and an instant development for the sector. While you were discussing, and it came to my mind an experience I had with the way a leading philanthropic institution here at the climate summit that we had in Nairobi just the end of last year. And there was a discussion with one of the key questions that was asked by grassroots leaders, people that working like, for example, even like us on the ground, is like how we can reach, because we have seen the discussion, the presentation, the philanthropic for change, we have these big umbrellas, but and I want to ask, I don't know if you can give us a complete answer, but an advice, like how the reachability and especially the impact that it's felt at the grassroots level. Sometimes we find from this side of the world, a bit of disconnect and some barriers. So can you elaborate on that and which advice you can give us?
So to give, sorry, I'm just wanting to make sure I get the question.
Yeah.
Advice.
So this so we can even get it out of the podcast, but it can be an interesting part because I was at this conference and with 5, 6 leading philanthropists from Gates Foundation and others, very big guys. And one of the discussion from the leaders at the grassroots level was like, yes, it's fantastic, your programs, your work, and that, but how we can reach you? What is how you can reach the grassroots? How you can reach down?
Yeah, so that's a really, really important question. We're actually very engaged on this whole reflection and discussion globally around locally led development or so-called localization of aid. And we really see a need for not just bilateral cooperation agencies or multilateral agencies, but also for foundations that work internationally to really become much more aware of the importance to support directly communities and grassroots organizations and national actors. The numbers are a little bit better from foundations than from international cooperation agencies in terms of how much they support directly local NGOs and national actors, but it's honestly not brilliant. And there's a lot of room to improve that. And there's actually an effort, a campaign starting, including in the US. The Consulant Foundation is starting to work with some leaders in the field, like the Hilton Foundation and like the Mott Foundation and others around that topic. And they've matched the commitment of USAID to have at least 25% going to local organizations. So things are moving, but I think it's still a very early reflection in the philanthropic sector. And there's still a bit of that sort of technocratic vision of philanthropy that prevails in many cases, and that goes against what I was talking about earlier, which is this trust that we need and this idea that we need to support local agency. That is something we need to really work on and raise awareness of donors, because it's true that there is a gap in many cases. The other aspect that I think is promising and interesting in this debate is that there is a whole ecosystem of players that can help fill that gap, actually. So it will not be easy for, like huge funders, just like it's not easy for the EU or others to go and make granular, very small grants to very small communities. It's almost impossible for them with their compliance regulations and everything. So there's a whole ecosystem that can actually fill that gap, and these are the what we call the community philanthropy field, or those local intermediaries that have capacity to manage funds in a transparent way and effective way, and that can receive resources, both international and national domestic resources, but that are very close to communities. And they really understand very well the needs, and they can support that local agency. So I think this ecosystem of local intermediaries, community funds, community foundations, social environmental funds, women's funds, et cetera, is absolutely critical in filling that gap. And that's one of the priority areas, I think, in terms of strengthening the ecosystem, the call I was making earlier. I think that layer of the ecosystem is absolutely essential if we want to fill the gap and really make sure that these resources are reaching the communities that need it most.
Fantastic. It's a really important part, and it is, as you said, sometimes, especially here at this side of the world in the global south, we feel that we have this one, the technology, the bureaucracies and things, but you can see the steps are made, and also there is also a call, no, for having more localized and locally led help and aid. And I want to ask this question now, uh, because we have seen the 10 points, we have seen the 3 points, the 3 steps. We have seen now also this the 25 and some commitments for USAID and any and others big organization going to local organization. How do you see in the in this next decade, which is not now decade, it's just 6 years until the fatal 2030? How do you see the trends of philanthropy? What is its role, and how do you foresee it, especially in the wake of the 2030 agenda and the achievement of SDGs?
Yeah, well, I think that echoing what we were discussing about, and this need for philanthropy to be more transformative in a deeper and broader way, I think there is this SDG, I think SDG 17, which is all about partners. I think that would be the aspect I would highlight in terms of really trying to accelerate to get closer to the 2030 agenda goals. Is the potential of philanthropy in being that partnership builder and that connector. Because again, philanthropy is close to civil society. It's also potentially close to governments. It has access that NGOs, for example, rarely have, and it has that flexible capital that they can leverage. So for me, philanthropy can really accelerate change by investing in this partnership. That also means I think they should invest in the partnership infrastructure or the partnership ecosystem, because partnerships, we can do them one by one. You go from one donor to another donor one by one, but it's going to take ages. So we need accelerators for these partnerships. That means we need platforms, we need coordination mechanisms. And there's actually a good example in Kenya where you're based with the SDG partnership platform that was started as a SDG philanthropy platform initially. That really has been hosted by the UN representation, and they've managed to really harness significant amounts of private capital, philanthropic capital beyond the presidential agenda, and that's been a really very positive example of how having a platform for that has actually allowed for co-funding and funding coordination at an important scale. So we need more of that at all levels, very local, national, of course, global. And Wings is trying to support this agenda. We also have a little bit of regranting that we do thanks to the partnership we have with the European Union. And so in the coming years, we'll also try to help seed fund some of these partnership mechanisms on the ground, because that's really what we think will be the most critical to bring about change and accelerate change.
Fantastic, Benjamin. I think it's really important, and as a way also to step up momentum for transformation to reach really what is the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. Been a wonderful and insightful episode, full of constant discussions, and really also for me a lesson on philanthropy and the role and also the transformation needed. And our usual question for change maker and leaders, it is what advice you can give us, since you have now at the top, you are discussing at a very big level, you're a global leader. So we want to ask for listeners, for people that are now following and regularly our podcast, we want to know, Benjamin, what you can give us, which advice you can give us in the regard of sustainability.
Sure. Well, I don't know if I'm at the top. I don't think I'm at the top, but I'm trying my best to bring about change where I am and with the opportunities I have. I would say that first, if you aspire to be a change maker, I think you already are a change maker. I give a lot of importance to intention and to values, and on the why and on the how, you know. I think what truly drives change in our world is the why and how. It's not the what you do exactly. Or so I would just say, like, it's important to follow this instinct that we have, this call that we have to really, you know, bring change. And wherever we are, at whatever level we operate, whatever opportunities we have to bring about change around us, we need to, you know, walk according to these values and follow that instinct. That is, I think, the essential part. Because if you look at it from an external point of view, you might see people doing like great things, but if in, you know, inside their themselves and the way they relate to others, the way they behave in the field is, you know, about competition, is about power, is about ego, I don't think they're actually changing the world. So I think it's really important to keep that, you know, at the core, at the center. And yeah, for those of us in the nonprofit space, I think it's essential that we shift from that scarcity and competition mindset, and that we really embrace more of a multiplier and collaboration and ecosystems mindset. Because in the end, it's not about our organizations, ourselves, our direct actions, our personal or success. That can be a motivator, but that's not about that. It's really about the broader and deeper change that we want to see. So that would be my advice. And then trust the flow, trust I have never been very sort of planned in what I was doing. I was just like following what I felt was right at a certain point of time, and then, you know, things bring to another, and that's how it works.
And fantastic. And I mean, it really got you, I mean, to a position where you can influence a lot and you can be a change maker and a big enabler for sustainability and for bringing impact and change. So it's really a wonderful advice. I really like it. And then so the why and how rather than the what. I think it's a very powerful message. So thank you so much, Benjamin, for your time. It has been a pleasure and honor hosting you.
Thank you, Samuel. It was great to talk to you. Really appreciate the invitation, and looking forward to following the future episodes as well. And so thank you, Samuel.
Thank you. Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.